In the Canadian seas, a couple of orcas are having fun, swimming and performing acrobatics in the water. Seemingly harmless and docile, these animals stroll through the water peacefully, without the interference of human beings. Nearby, at a campsite on the coast, the sounds of these animals are picked up by two divers using their equipment. However, while exploring the sea, one of them sees an enormous great white shark approaching and swims for cover in the middle of the coral reef. At the same time, a fishing boat, led by Captain Nolan, is looking for the marine predator to sell to a local aquarium. They soon find the great white shark and Nolan prepares to fire his harpoon, but the other diver warns him that his colleague is still in the sea. Finally, the diver returns to his dinghy and reveals that he is a young teacher called Rachel. She and her colleague, Ken, were exploring the sea, but Nolan blames them for scaring off the shark and losing a whole day's work. However, the creature soon reappears and Nolan orders the two divers to board his ship. Rachel obeys and Ken says he will accompany them in the dinghy, but on the way, the engine malfunctions and he is left adrift at sea. To make matters worse, while trying to fix it, the man slips into the water and the shark starts swimming towards him. With no choice, he swims as fast as he can, but the predator gets closer and closer. Then one of the orcas appears in the sea and, without hesitation, it attacks the shark, eliminating it without difficulty. Everyone, including Ken, is impressed by the animal's strength, but Rachel explains that this is an orca whale, one of the most fearsome mammals on the planet. Later, in a lecture, Rachel gives the students more details about the orca. She says that they are intelligent animals, which can be docile when tamed by humans, but strongly aggressive in hostile environments. These animals even emit sound waves that allow them to locate themselves in the sea, which only makes them more efficient hunters. The students are intrigued by this information, but one person is even more interested in the orca, Captain Nolan. He asks for more details about the creature and Rachel agrees to share her knowledge, but begins to suspect his real interests. One day, Nolan calls her to the town's port and shows her his tank, which will be used to capture the orca. Rachel disapproves of the idea and warns him that orcas are intelligent beings and, above all, vengeful if provoked. However, the guy is willing to take the risk, as he has discovered that the sale value of an orca is even higher than that of a shark. Annoyed by this, Rachel leaves, fearing that the captain will end up hurting or doing something worse to these animals. Meanwhile, a group of orcas made up of adults and calves are swimming carefree in the middle of the sea. However, they are soon threatened when Captain Nolan's ship begins its hunt. While preparing his harpoons, Nolan asks his assistant, Annie, to increase the dosage of sleeping pills, as orcas are more resistant than sharks. She refuses, because she has discovered that these animals are monogamous, having only one partner throughout their lives. Because of this, if one of them is taken from the sea, they will be breaking up a family and this could have serious consequences. However, he doesn't care and, as soon as a group of orcas is spotted, he orders his team to prepare for the attack. Aiming his harpoon at the male in the group, Nolan fires, but the shot grazes his fin and hits the female straight on. The poor orca screams in pain and her serious injury leads her to squirm all over the sea. She even starts crashing into the ship's engines, which only makes her injury worse. Realizing what he had done, Captain Nolan ordered the team to deactivate the engines and, using the harpoon rope, they pulled her into the ship. As well as being badly injured, the orca ends up expelling what appears to be a calf from her body, indicating that she was pregnant and the attack caused her to lose her baby. Horrified by all this, Captain Nolan orders the team to throw the animal back into the sea, but the cable gets caught in the pulley. He then uses a hose to expel the body of the calf into the water. While at sea, the male orca screams in fury at what they have done to his family. When night falls, the ship heads back to port, with the orca secured by the cables. However, the crew feel a tremor coming from the sea and believe that the ship has collided with a reef. But as soon as he goes on deck to see what's happened, Nolan encounters the male of the group of orcas, who charges at the ship. The impact almost capsizes the ship and, seeing that the creature is thirsty for revenge, Nolan decides to send the female back to sea. After much effort, they manage to release her into the water, but the male collides with the ship again, knocking Novak, the captain's assistant, off balance. Luckily, he holds onto one of the masts, but with a leap, the orca reaches him and, with its sharp teeth, pulls him into the sea. The captain has no reaction to losing his companion, but soon the male reappears and begins to stare at him. The creature seems to have etched Nolan's face in its eyes and leaves, as if promising to find him again to settle the score. The next day, the orca tries to get his companion to react, but the harpoon has left her seriously injured. After losing a lot of blood, she doesn't resist and ends up losing her life, with her companion pushing her lifeless body to the shore. Hours later, Nolan and Paul, Annie's boyfriend, arrive at the site, where they find the orca's body. Next to her is Rachel, who reprimands the captain for having eliminated an innocent being in such a cowardly way, and warns him that her companion will soon return. Also appearing is Rachel's colleague, Professor Jacob, who warns of the orca's high capacity for memorization. This means that they never forget those who mistreat them, which is why Nolan must stay away from those waters. Even though he doesn't believe everything he's been told, the captain feels guilty about what he's done and decides to follow the advice. Later, he goes to the church and, after the mass in honor of his late friend, he asks to speak to the priest alone. Nolan confesses to feeling remorse for the loss of Novak, but the priest comforts him, advising him not to dwell on the past. Even so, Nolan asks if it is possible to commit a sin against an animal, and the priest replies that it is, because the sin affects, above all, the one who commits it. This answer doesn't make the captain feel any better, but it does reinforce his decision to give up hunting orcas once and for all. Minutes later, he and Paul go to the harbor and meet Al Swain, leader of the local fishermen's union. He says that he has heard about the orca and fears that it will damage the town's fishing, because with the creature around, it will devour all the fish. This fear soon proves to be true when, shortly afterwards, the animal starts attacking several fishing boats, destroying their hulls and causing them to sink into the water. Seeing this, Captain Nolan decides to ask his colleagues to help him give the female a proper burial, hoping that this gesture will calm the sea beast. In the evening, the fishermen finish the burial and, soon after, Rachel shows up to check on Nolan. Although the captain tries to disguise it, she realizes that Nolan still feels bad about what happened and gives him a book about the whale myth as a gift. He thanks her for the gesture and invites her to a vigil, which will be held at his house as a tribute to the deceased orca. The conversation, however, is interrupted by Al, who says he has sent Nolan's ship for repairs and hopes he will leave town as soon as possible. The guy believes that the captain is bringing bad luck to the place, because as he feared, not only have the ships been damaged by the orca, but it has also devoured the fish in the area. Nolan says that it's all just superstition and that he doesn't want to leave town until he's recovered what he's invested in the ship. Even so, Al advises him to change his mind, because nearby, a young man has spotted the injured fin of an orca, which seems to be keeping watch over the city's seas. Tired of the whole situation, Captain Nolan decides to put it to the test and goes in search of the beast. When he reaches the coast, the sea seems to be calm, but shortly afterwards, the orca appears and, on seeing the captain, lets out a powerful grunt, as if challenging him. The next day, the fishermen's union meets to take action about the orca. They tried to ask the government to intervene in the situation, but since it is a free animal in its natural habitat, they replied that they don't have the authority to expel the orca. The fishermen then try to convince Nolan to hunt down the orca and eliminate it once and for all, but the captain still refuses. On leaving the meeting, he meets Jacob, who understands Nolan's reasons for not wanting to hunt the orca, but advises him to think of another solution before another tragedy befalls the town. The captain thanks him for the advice and, remembering the book Rachel gave him, he decides to take a look at it in search of some information that might help him. In one of the chapters, the text informs him that orcas are able to sense the intentions of a human being and even communicate with them. Hoping that this is true, Nolan sets up a night camp on the coast and makes a scarecrow of himself to attract the orca. Minutes later, Rachel reappears and questions the captain, believing that he is setting a trap against the animal. Nolan defends himself, saying that for a moment he did think about doing it and even brought his gun to put an end to the creature. However, he hopes that he will be able to communicate with the animal and tell it that he is sorry for everything that has happened. This attitude surprises Rachel and she says she will help him, with the two of them waiting for the orca inside the camp. There, the captain says he understands the orca's fury at the loss of his mate, as he has shared this feeling in the past. Years ago, Nolan's wife was pregnant and drove herself to the hospital, but ended up crashing into the car of a driver who was driving drunk on the highway. Unfortunately, mother and baby lost their lives, just as Nolan's captured orca did. Rachel is moved by the story and the two continue their conversation, without noticing that the leader orca has returned to the port, thirsting for revenge. With a leap, she breaks the port's fuel pipes, which begin to flood a ship moored there. Then, using his strength, he crashes into the ship, knocking over a lamp and setting the fuel on fire. Seeing this, Nolan and Rachel try to stop the fire, but it soon spreads to a fuel reserve, setting it on fire completely. As a result, the town's fishermen now have no fish, no ships and no fuel to power their boats and vehicles. In a drastic measure, the fishermen get together to finish the repairs to the bumpo ship and tell Nolan that he needs to hunt the orca. Otherwise, he and his team will have to leave the town or be forcibly evicted by the locals. Seeing that he has no other choice, Nolan decides to confront the orca whale, as he doesn't want to risk the lives of any other members of his crew. Before leaving, he calls Rachel to tell her of his decision and says goodbye, as he fears the confrontation will not end well. However, the young woman tries to convince him to change his mind, as she fears that confronting the orca will only provoke even more anger against Nolan and the whole town. Because of his feelings for Rachel, the captain goes back on his word and promises not to confront the orca. After that, he heads to the garage, and on the way, he meets Annie, who has a broken leg because of the orca attack on the ship. The captain says he'll be back soon and asks her to continue resting in the room. Annie agrees and grabs a drink to pass the time, but the orca appears and is about to attack again. At that moment, the young woman senses that something is strange, and her suspicions are confirmed when the orca collides with the foundations of the house, which are underwater. The collision causes the whole place to collapse, and Nolan rushes to help Annie, but the house is leaning and he can't balance himself. Shortly afterwards, Paul also appears and throws a fishing net for his girlfriend to hold, but she can't and slips over the edge of the house, a few meters from the water. Nolan and Paul do their best to pull her back in, but before they can, the orca leaps towards Annie and, with a single bite, removes her leg. The unbearable pain causes Annie to faint, but the orca has had enough of the pain and leaves. Minutes later, the ambulance arrives to rescue the young woman who, despite having survived the attack, has been seriously injured. This turns out to be the last straw for Nolan, who, seeing the orca in the distance, decides to eliminate it once and for all. So, the next morning, Paul and Jacob board the ship and set off across the sea in search of the chief orca. In addition to them, Ken and Rachel decide to go together, as the teacher hopes to prevent a greater tragedy from happening. Even so, Nolan is determined to finish off his adversary and makes the last preparations before the final showdown. After hours at sea, the group finally encounters the orca, which once again attacks the ship's hull to sink it. Seeing the predator that narrowly missed his girlfriend, Paul takes the gun, but Nolan asks him to give it to him, as this is a personal matter. Nolan then goes on deck and lights the fuse of a dynamite to throw at the orca. However, Rachel tries to stop him and the two of them drop the explosive on the deck, which is about to explode, but the young woman throws the bomb into the sea before it's too late. Then the orca whale reappears and begins to move its fins, as if it were taunting the ship's crew. Nolan accepts the challenge and begins to follow it, but when the orca disappears into the sea, it jumps up seconds later near the ship and grabs Ken, who was leaning on one of the masts. Without any difficulty, the creature devours the young diver, while everyone watches in awe, unable to do anything. Now all that's left to do is continue the hunt, and Nolan launches the sound pickup so he can hear the sound of the orca and follow its trail. Another day passes and the orca continues to lead them on an unknown path through the sea. However, Nolan realizes that she is leading them out of the city, towards the so-called Labrador coast, a region surrounded by huge icebergs. Jacob believes that they are being led into a trap, but Nolan thinks that the frozen environment could help them eliminate the orca. After hours at sea, the ship's fuel is slowly running out and the temperature is dropping rapidly. The crew are beginning to lose hope and are considering returning to the city, but Nolan is obsessed with confronting the orca, whatever the cost. At the end of the day, Paul turns on the ship's flashlight to see and realizes that the boat is approaching a huge column of ice. Luckily, he manages to stop the boat before it collides, and the captain orders him to find a gap in the ice so that they can get through. Tired of the chase and Nolan's orders, Paul refuses and starts to climb down the lifeboat, considering leaving the place alone. Nolan is enraged by this attitude, but Jacob interrupts the discussion and tells them both to take a break. The captain follows his advice, but Paul continues to lower the dinghy, until he is surprised by the orca, which leaps towards him and knocks him over, along with the dinghy. Hearing his companion's screams, Nolan rushes to help him, but he doesn't get there in time and the orca devours Paul completely. With this loss, the captain no longer knows what to do, but Rachel calls him to talk and tries to calm him down. Another night passes and, as daylight breaks, Nolan realizes that the ship is surrounded by huge ice structures. With few supplies and a low temperature, the captain decides to settle the score with the orca before there is no hope of returning home. Even so, he is willing to put up a fair fight and, instead of using his gun, Nolan takes out his harpoon. Finally, it's time for the confrontation, but just as he was about to leave the ship, Jacob appears, his gun pointed at the captain, and he warns him that he will take the ship back to the city's port and put an end to this matter. While the two of them are fighting, Rachel appears and warns them that an iceberg is rapidly approaching the ship. The three notice that the orca is pushing the huge block of ice towards the boat, and if they collide, the ship will sink, along with its crew. Jacob then rushes to send an SOS message to the nearest ports and ships, while Nolan asks Rachel to give him the harpoon. Then, waiting for the right moment, the captain aims the weapon at the creature which, as it comes out of the water to breathe, is hit hard by the harpoon. The orca screams in pain as it writhes underwater, but the iceberg continues to approach until it finally collides with the ship. The impact makes a huge hole in the hull and water begins to rush into the boat. What's more, the collision leads to the ship crashing into the mountains of ice, causing the deck to slide. As a result, Jacob is hit by the huge blocks of ice and loses his life. The situation only gets worse, as the flood inside the ship causes it to capsize and sink into the ice. Nolan and Rachel quickly jump onto the ice floes and run for safety, until the orca reappears and chases them again. The predator uses its fins to destroy the ice beneath them and Nolan tries to fight back, firing shots from his gun. Even so, the orca doesn't give up and continues the chase, until the pair manage to climb one of the ice walls. Despite this, the animal uses all its strength to hit the huge structure, causing Nolan to overbalance and fall back onto the ice floe. When he recovers from the blow, he tries to get back on, but the block separates and begins to float in the water, while the orca surrounds him, waiting for the opportunity to attack. To help him, Rachel throws the gun at Nolan, who manages to catch it and aims it at the creature. For a moment, the captain hesitates to shoot and the orca takes the opportunity to lean on the ice floe, leaving it tilted enough for Nolan to slide towards it. With nowhere to hold on, the captain ends up falling into the water and the orca starts swimming around him. Then, using its tail, the creature delivers the final blow and hurls Nolan towards the ice wall, knocking him on the head and eliminating him. Now lifeless, Captain Nolan's body slips on the ice and falls to the bottom of the sea, where it will be trapped forever. Rachel watches in horror at what has just happened and the orca, who stares at her, considers his revenge accomplished and leaves. While swimming under the ice and back home, a helicopter appears on the scene to rescue Rachel. Whether or not the orca survived the harpoon wound is yet another of the many mysteries hidden in the sea. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.